Hello again and welcome to a brand new episode of the MMA Beat. It is Thursday, May 19th, 2016. I'm Ariel Helwani inside our New York City studio. That is Luke Thomas of SiriusXM and MMAfighting.com. That is the man in the shirt, Jeff Wagenheim of the Washington Post and SportsIllustrated.com. And of course, that is the man in the hat, Chuck Mindenhall, also of MMAfighting.com. Breaking news. Another busy week in the world of MMA. A lot going on. How about that? Yes. I don't actually have breaking news, but...
You got me excited for me. Now I'm disappointed.
Who would have thunk it? Tons going on. Stuff that we didn't expect to happen last week. Here we are talking about a new main event right off the bat. Let's start with this for UFC 199. So on Tuesday, Chris Weidman withdraws from the fight, dealing with a serious neck injury. Hasn't decided yet whether or not he's going to have surgery on the neck, but he cannot fight, and he obviously made the right call according to his doctors, his team, all that stuff. They don't want him to fight. So he is out of that main event against Luke Rockhold, and they went to Jacare Souza first. He's having surgery today. He may have had it already, by the time we tape this. And so then they went to plan B, or is it plan C? I don't know. Michael Bisping. Michael Bisping, who's been in the UFC for a decade, who's had ups and downs, who's been asking for a title shot since a decade, essentially. He's getting his title shot on 2.5 weeks' notice. He's fighting Luke Rockhold, the man who submitted him with one arm back in Sydney, Australia, and what was that? 2014. 2014. Was it Sydney or was it Brisbane or was it even? It was Australia.
I'll say what it was. Fight Pass.
It was on Fight Pass, was it? Did they get the right call?
I think they really did. First of all, I just want to say one thing. I felt so bad for Chris Weidman. I don't even mean to laugh at it, but when Kurt Angle is tweeting you about neck surgery strategies, your health is in trouble. And he was like, followed and DM'd. I was like, oh man, poor Chris Weidman.
By the way, have you ever seen Kurt Angle in person?
I saw him at Bellator 149.
He can't move his neck. He has to move his whole body.
Shocked at how infirm he is.
Call him Angle.
It's unbelievable.
Anyway, in terms of Michael Bisping, look, you could make a case. You can go down the line, and I talked to Michael Bisping about this, and I brought this question to him too about what about Uriah Hall? He's coming off of a loss. His resume's not all that great right now. Mousasi, you probably could have done if you really, really wanted to, but he doesn't bring a lot of star power. This is a business. I think that's a fair response that he had. But look, the champion has a responsibility to defend the title to a worthy contender. The first worthy contender, Chris Weidman, could not make it. The second worthy contender in the queue, as determined by UFC leadership, could not make it. He is the next person up. He's on a 3-fight win streak. He just beat Anderson Silva. It's a decade in the making. If he cannot get a title shot from a 3-fight win streak, beating Anderson Silva after waiting 10 years as an injury replacement, not even the original plan, Jeff, I don't know when he can get one.
It was time, and like you said, there weren't a lot of other options. Originally I was thinking, what about Tim Kennedy? And then I looked at his record. He hasn't fought since September of 2014.
Yeah. Whoa.
Then that was that very controversial loss to Romero. But before that, he has a win over Bisping. So I was thinking he's the guy, but then it occurred to me that no, he's not the guy. So Michael Bisping, I hate to frame it in the context of there were no other options, but it kind of is that way. But you know what? If you've beaten Anderson Silva in your last fight, it's not just there's no other option thing. It's a thing where you earn something. You earn something good to happen in your career if you beat Anderson Silva. Something should come your way, and this is it.
How many iterations have we seen of these guys coming up where Bisping has been right there and then loses that pivotal fight that puts him back behind everything? Going back to UFC 100, where he's going against Dan Henderson, it was like he's right there, right? If he gets by Dan Henderson, he's probably going to get that title shot. He gets knocked out. That was 16 fights ago.
Wow.
People were talking about back in the day, like, well, Bisping, he'll get it first. Maybe then somebody like Dan Hardy come up. Dan Hardy gets it at UFC 111. It's just crazy how long this guy's been vying for a title shot. And it's odd that, I guess it's sort of poetic in a way that it happens the way it's happening. All of a sudden, a guy falls out. They need a spot. He's the perfect guy because he's located there. He can. I know he's filming a movie or whatever he's doing right now up in Canada, but he's there essentially, and you just don't know when he's going to get that shot. And at this point, in my mind, when that happened, he was the first guy that crossed my mind. I'm like, well, this could be Michael Bisping's moment. Then you see him on social media, and I was like, that's the way you play it. I just feel like that's the best possible option. It's not ideal for him to get a fight. I know you were asking about his weight and things like that and where he's at, and it's not ideal to have to cram and get ready for a guy like Rockhold who's already beat you once, but man, if you get this opportunity, it's like it's a little bit poetic to see him finally get that shot, and especially against a guy that he wanted to get another shot against too.
I'm a little torn over this one because, you know, I've said since he beat Anderson Silva that that's the fight that gets him the title shot. And here he is, you know, let's say Monday, before this Weidman news comes out, here he is 2 weeks away from the fight happening, and then you hope that the winner of that fight, Weidman Rockhold 2, gets to fight him. And you know, he waited out, he played his cards right, he beats Anderson. It's everything, you know, all the stars are aligning. And then Weidman gets injured. And now here's a guy who's been asking, dreaming of this opportunity. He would have gone down, in my opinion, as the best fighter to never fight for a UFC title, and certainly the most popular. I mean, think about the people in the last couple of years that have fought for the UFC belt. Michael Bisping can't even sniff it, so he gets that opportunity, but it's on 2.5 weeks' notice. Like I was trying to equate this to something, and it's not a perfect example, but imagine John Elway, end of his career, can never get to the Super Bowl, can never win the Super Bowl, and the NFL calls him up and said, and I know this isn't, but it's like, you're going to get your shot in July. I know you're not ready. I know you're overweight. You haven't been playing, but the team that you're going to play against has been playing all, you know, spring long. And hey, good luck to you. The game's on Sunday. It's Thursday afternoon. You know what I mean?
Well, given your druthers, I mean, you'd still want that opportunity.
You want the
right?
shot.
So,
you want the shot, but you kind of wish he gets a full training camp to finally get a shot at that title, right? To finally realize his dream, because he's. Not only, if he would have had a full training camp to fight Luke Rockhold, he would have been a huge underdog. He is fighting a Luke Rockhold who was preparing to peak on June 4th. He's been waiting for this fight since December, since he won the belt. And now he has to fight him on 2.5 weeks' notice. He hasn't been training. He's been filming a movie. So I'm happy for him. But part of me feels like, gosh, I wish he would have waited it out.
He's also fighting a Luke Rockhold who was preparing for a different fighter, right? So we was preparing for him. And Rockhold, this is one of those opportunities, you know, we always talk about guys overlooking somebody, and I think that's sort of overblown. I think most of these guys are able to maintain the focus of what's in front of them. But this could be one of those opportunities for a guy to slip in under the radar a little bit. Bisping did not put up much of a fight when he fought against Rockhold. Now, Rockhold was preparing to fight another guy he'd beaten, but if you go back and look at that Rockhold-Weidman fight, Weidman took it to him for that first round. It was only after that first round when Rockhold sort of started turning it around. And so Rockhold, training for that fight, was thinking, you know, this is a guy who, you know, he took it to me. He could fight me. And I really have to prepare myself really strongly. He looks at Bisping as a guy that he not only beat, but beat pretty handily.
Yeah.
As you phrased it, he choked him out with one hand. I mean, I know that was just the way the submission happened, but it was almost symbolic that he did it with one hand, you know,
And still kudos to, you know, obviously to Rockhold for taking the fight. I mean, this is always one of those situations you think, that's got to be a weird thing. You know, going from Chris Weidman, who was the champ, to sort of, to use your analogy, the Bird Magic rivalry continues, but this time, and the other, you know what I mean? It's one of those things that I think he was looking forward to re-emphasizing, like where he's at, and then to go against a guy like Michael Bisping, which I don't think he really truly enjoyed the experience of having to try to match Bisping in the wordplay beforehand when they fought the last time. He seemed very out of his element, and I know like last night they were on TV and they were doing this again. It felt very awkward again. I feel like he's putting himself into a weird position to have to take this fight, but you feel like the guy just rolls with the punches in the fight game, and I feel like that's, you know, it's kudos to him. I always think of the guy on the other side who has to accept that as well.
Yeah.
I was going to say, you know, if you watch the NFL, one thing that people always say about the league is it's a next man up league. If you're the starting tight end and you get injured, then the backup tight end comes right in and they can take your spot very quickly, permanently.
Yeah.
You know, the truth of the matter is, I don't know what fighters are really going to do, because this is a tough reality. The UFC has become something of a next man up kind of league, where if somebody falls out, they're looking for replacements. But these guys have lives to live. You know, it's one thing if we're both on the same team, we play the same position, I get injured and you fill in. We're all on the same schedule.
Sure.
But Michael Bisping's trying to film a movie. Why would he turn that down? He's got a family to feed. He probably wants to be in a movie. Why would he go and train just out of the blue because there's another title fight? That's expensive and difficult to do. Everyone's like, you should, if you're a contender, you should train alongside these guys. That is completely unrealistic. That would that would never work in a million years unless the UFC paid you in a dedicated way to do it.
We always forget these people are human beings, you know, have lives and opportunities.
So my point being is, I don't know what fighters are going to do, man. What is the right answer? I don't know, but you can see there's a disconnect between living a life and the next man up league responsibilities.
I will also say this was the right call for the UFC in the sense that he's going to sell the fight a heck of a lot more than Jacare was. Jacare can't speak English. I mean, just look at the beginning beginning of this on Twitter and all that stuff. Bisping is going to do his part to sell this fight. And from a Luke Rockhold standpoint, who now gets pay-per-view points and all that as champion, okay, you probably want Bisping to be in there against Jacare. I remember interviewing Luke Rockhold in Cincinnati when he won the Strikeforce title, and he was physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted from fighting Jacare. That was a 5-round war, so to speak. I mean, that was a close fight. A lot of people still think he didn't deserve to win the fight. That's not something he wants to do on 2 weeks' notice. This is a perfect scenario for him. He gets to fight Bisping, who's going to sell the fight, talk some smack. He's a better smack talker than him, so he gets to do a little less of that. And he already beat him rather convincingly the second time they fought. Bisping still holding his hat on the first one, which originated on your former program, MMA Uncensored. So all that considered, I am shocked that the UFC publicly said that the top choice was Jacare. I know he just fought. I know he just looked really good against Vitor Belfort, but Michael Bisping not only has Michael Bisping been in the UFC for 10 years, not only is Michael Bisping, is he a former Ultimate Fighter winner, this is like a soldier for you guys. This guy single-handedly built that market in Europe for you, in England, in the UK, long before there was anyone doing anything in Europe for the UFC. When Michael Bisping won Top 3, he did a ton of work with Marshall Zelaznik and Anthony Evans on the front lines, like grassroots UK. And you can't gift this guy a title shot at this point on 2.5 weeks' notice. And even to come out publicly and say that Jacare was the top choice, in case anyone wants to know, we called Jacare first, he couldn't do it, and then we called Michael Bisping. Gosh, I mean, way to sell us on this guy being, you know what I mean? I just couldn't believe the way that whole thing played out.
You should just market him as Plan C. Don't even put Bisping.
It was unnecessary, I think, they keep their cards close to the vest on a lot of things, and this might have been one where they could have also done that, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a tough choice too, right? Because I feel like Jacare has been pretty deserving of a title shot. That Romero loss to me was not a loss. I did not think he lost that. And the last one he had lost before that was to Luke Rockhold, all the way back in 2011. He has been on a murderous run since then. And he just came off a camp. Maybe it was in deference to Michael Bisping being like, he's up in Toronto drinking beers courtside at the Raptors games, which he literally was doing last week. So maybe it could have been one of those kinds of scenarios rather than that. But I think to your point, it just should be noted that this is another reason to give him the title shot, was because this guy, he's been fighting on pay-per-views for a long time, but he's been going to the far reaches of the galaxy for them. China, Australia, French Canada, name it. He's been doing these small shows, and he's been one of the bigger fights on these small shows. It's time he got a big-time show and a big-time main event. I'm happy for him.
Let me ask you this question. So 199 is a great card. I think we talked about this last week. I mean, that is a tremendous card, and there's something for everyone. It also is coming before 200, and you have to wonder if it's going to take a hit because people are saving their money, whatever. So Rockhold Jacare is not going to sell the fight, but as a fan, as a hardcore fan, you're like, I mean, I want to see that fight. Don't get me wrong. I'm happy to a degree that Jacare said no. I'm not happy that he's hurt, but it's like I want to see Jacare have a full camp, prepare for Rockhold. I want to see Rockhold have a full camp to prepare for Jacare. So as a fight fan, I think we would all agree that that's probably a closer matchup and a more interesting rematch. But then you have the Bisping factor where he can sell it. My question to you is that all a wash as far as pay-per-views are concerned? Or do you think that Bisping sells more from his mouth, that overrides the hardcore fan interest in the Rockhold Jacare? Do you get what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, of course, but I mean, Jacare just fought at UFC 198. For him to fight in back-to-back cards, sometimes that has its own appeal too. Just a quick turnaround. That would have been sort of
Chris Lieben effect.
Exactly. But it's also, if you're like me, like you were mentioning, the whole Jacare versus Rockhold, that first fight, because I was there as well. It was a fun first fight. It was very competitive. You look at what Rockhold has been able to do. There's only two guys who've taken him the distance. Either he gets finished, which has only happened, I think, once, right? Or maybe twice because of Tony, way back in the day. Or he finishes. And there's two guys who've taken him the distance. One of them was Jacare. In my mind, when you see that kind of thing, you think, man, those guys have to come together again. I mean, obviously it was such a hotly contested first fight. You want to see it again. But in this situation, I just can't help but think, like, man, Bisping just seemed to me like the one that you intuit into that spot right away. Just given that Jacare just fought and everything else, I'm like, Bisping is right there. Now, the public just doesn't know everything that's going on with Bisping. They, like you said, they just think he's right there at the ready. But we know that he is based in Los Angeles. He's out there normally and all this. This is, I guess, his adopted hometown and all this stuff. It seems like the right market for him to fight in a main event. So in my mind, it was just like,
it's the sweetheart move.
It's the sweetheart move, and I feel like he's deserved it. And that might translate into a few more buys, but ultimately, I don't know. It seems like it would be about the same. I think it's about the same.
Yeah, I think that the hardcore fight. I agree with you that the Jacare fight is the more appealing one, just purely from that hardcore fight perspective. But I think that the preparation time is part of that. And so, as a fan myself of the best matchup possible, I want those guys both to be prepared, because I don't like when there's an excuse built in afterward.
Yeah.
And so let's say Jacare was the guy, and he went out there and Rockhold just trashed him. Well, Jacare, I just fought, a few weeks ago. I feel like when two guys are both at the top of their game, I want to see everything, all the ducks in a row. I want everything to be perfect as they go in. I know that's usually pretty ridiculous and never happens.
I know.
But that's what I'm aiming for. When you're just trying to save a card, looking for the best late replacement, let's give Bisping his opportunity.
I like that aspect. I like that storyline of like, oh, he's taking the fight on 2 weeks. It's sort of Miracle Michael. Can he pull it off? But from an athlete perspective, from a sporting perspective, you want to see the playing field as level as possible, and you want to see him. That part kind of bothers me, that it's under these terms.
Also just kicks. It's so crazy when they do these things, because it just kicks the whole narrative off. Like, for instance, Nate Diaz going into that fight with McGregor. That whole makeshift situation then becomes a prolonged situation where you're dealing with it again because of what happened the first time that wasn't supposed to really happen.
Yeah,
and it's weird because now you have Bisping coming in on this sort of nose. Let's just say Bisping wins. Suddenly you've got a 1-1 thing, and the rest of the division is sort of like, oh, now what happens?
Right.
I mean, it's crazy that the fate of the division, the fate of so much, falls into just one guy's meniscus or something like that, one guy hurting his knee or whatever it is. You know what I mean? It's just it's kind of weird. I feel like this is the only sport where that's possible.
One thing I would add to that conversation is I do think we're shortchanging Michael a little bit. I don't think he is a major pay-per-view star. He hasn't fought on pay-per-view all that much in the latter part of his career. But I think the numbers for this will be disappointing, because it's too late, and what kind of star power do both guys have, really? However, I do think it'd be substantially less with Jacare. I really do. I think you can still say these are going to be low numbers, disappointing relative numbers, but I do think that there is something to be said for what Bisping can add. I think there's a real effect there that should be noted.
Do you think that more people will be watching the BJ Penn prelim fights?
And let's not neglect that factor of Rockhold overlooking Bisping because of what he did. I mean, he was not going to overlook Jacare. He wasn't overlooking Weidman. I think there's that possibility that with short notice he might just skate in there, and who knows what happens.
He obsesses over his opponent. So it's sort of it is interesting, right? It's like interesting for him to have to shift gears, because I think he really, really obsesses over the guy he's going to fight.
If there's one thing Luke Rockhold does not lack, it's self-confidence. So you wonder if he thinks, especially now as champion, the first title defense is very interesting. And also, don't sleep on that Friday weigh-in, because Michael Bisping is going to bring it at that weigh-in, and that clip can be showed. And who knows what he's going to do. So let me ask you this, Luke. Jacare was the top choice. Should he still be the top choice? Come June 5th, is he the number one contender? Or does Chris Weidman deserve that shot because he was the original top choice, even though he's maybe going to go under the knife? Or is it Yoel Romero, who is free and clear come July? Now they have a predicament, and this is where it gets a little dicey for Jacare.
There is one blessing to this. Now, what pecking order you choose, I think, will be entirely dependent upon when they need to build their calendar and who's available at the time, and we can make a choice from there. But I have long believed that Weidman rematch with Rockhold was way too soon. It should not have happened. You could ruin a guy in a span of December to June in terms of his promotional ability. Had he lost to Rockhold back-to-back, let's say he got finished again, you'd be like, oh no, what do you do now? To me, you actually move on from Weidman. First of all, that neck injury is incredibly serious.
Yeah.
But more than that, let's start funneling in these guys. Let's start moving Romero up the chain and then Jacare up the chain. I don't really care who either of those get. To me, it doesn't matter. Just they're relatively equal in skill level anyway, based on that fight. So put them all in there. But for me, I think Weidman, when he comes back, should not get an automatic title shot.
So this was a blessing in disguise in a weird way.
I know. Well, certainly the injury could be long-term.
Of course.
I don't mean in that sense.
And
But
it sure felt like that. So it felt like a lot of people didn't really. They weren't married to that idea of a rematch anyway. I felt like there wasn't this big outcry about that.
So what do you do?
I mean, I'm with you on that too, and I think it's kind of complicated because of Romero coming back from his suspension and everything. I guess I would look to Jacare just given all that landscape, but
Even though he technically beat Jacare?
but I mean, like Luke was saying, I mean, it depends on how you squint in that
Yeah,
fight.
I
If you
know.
want to go with the official scorecards, I guess you could say that, but I didn't really see it that way. So, I mean, it just depends, but I feel like Jacare, having just fought and beat Vitor the way he did, I mean, that would probably be the way I'd go.
I think you can make a case for any of those three, really. They've all have the credentials that, but I'd like to see two of them fight again, or two of them fight each other, and I don't know.
That's the other thing. Weidman could go against either.
Yeah,
of those guys.
Weidman against one of those guys. We could see Jacare and Romero again because of the way their last fight. Because even, I'm not one of those guys who likes to say, well, this guy got his arm raised, but I thought this guy won. I think that we could do that with so many fights.
Yeah.
However, in this case, we do have documented use of a PED. Even though he got off easily because of these circumstances, I still think that kind of exonerates Jacare from the loss because he was fighting a guy who was on PEDs. So I think that there's a certainly good reason to either push him up to the title fight or at least give him Romero again.
Sure, but important to note that
He was clean on fight night, right?
it was after the fact. It was after the fact that he popped. It was the test that came after the fight. So, don't want to throw him under the bus.
But I think Jeff's right.
I get what you're saying, though. He did get
You could put them
suspended.
again together because it was super tight.
It was.
So one of these guys can.
I wish it was a 5-round fight.
Right, exactly. Jacare was sort of leading at the end there.
I do like the idea. I think Jacare Rockhold, if Rockhold wins, I don't want to sleep on Michael. Crazy things have happened in the sport. If Rockhold wins, I like the idea of Jacare versus Rockhold 2 in October or so. And I love the idea, if he can get healthy, Weidman fighting in New York, not for the belt. Timing doesn't work out, but fighting a Romero in New York. I mean, I think that's a big showcase fight for him.
Huge fight.
And if he's coming off neck surgery, it'll be two guys who have had neck surgery, two wrestlers. Romero had neck
for an
surgery.
interim title, and they can fight 5
No,
rounds.
please don't do that. Please don't do that. You think that's going to be the main event of MSG?
I don't even think they main event, but hey,
Just throw a
I've
5.
seen worse co-main events.
Yes. So I like that. I guess the good part for the UFC is it's good to have options. Sometimes we have these divisions,
moments after those
C125, right? Yeah, but look at 125. They got no options.
That's true. I'm just
But they're
saying.
all good options too.
yeah, exactly.
You,
Exactly.
Just like
That's right.
you made a really good case for that fight, you could probably make a good case for any of the other ones as
Yeah.
well. And that's not a bad thing.
Variety is not a problem. It's just a challenge.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about this 125 division. Yesterday, it's officially announced that Demetrius Johnson is not going to wait for the Ultimate Fighter finale. He is not going to wait to December. He's actually making a pretty quick comeback. And this is interesting because he's going to fight July 30th against Wilson Hayes, the former Elite XC champion. In
You
the
just tossed that out there, and they just took that.
It was
That's
weird.
pretty cool.
I started dreaming about Wilson. I was thinking about him. I was like, look, he's on a 1-fight winning streak. This makes all the sense in the world.
I can see it.
It's amazing. So to me, it's interesting because here's a guy who could actually stand from a competitive standpoint to take a break, let the division kind of work itself out, let a list of contenders, a queue, if you will, develop. But he's the most active champion. He's defended his title 8 times. The next best champion has only defended their title twice. That's Joanna Jędrzejczyk and Robbie Lawler. So there's a big gap in terms of activity and in terms of successful title defenses. And here he is coming back right after his last fight, and he's fighting a guy who, it was on no one's radar. I think he's ranked 8th or 7th. Watch him shoot up to number 3 in the UFC rankings. What do we make of this? To me, it's like, yeah, he wants to break the record. I like it, and kudos to him. Make that money, man. You just got that new contract. I have no problem from a DJ perspective, but I'm surprised that the UFC wants to keep him so active when there's just a short queue of guys that really makes sense for him.
Yeah, I think that he really wants that record in a big way, and I think he wants it quickly.
Yeah.
I think that and also we always talk about him not being as big of a draw as those other champions, and that means he doesn't make as much money as some of those other guys. So it means you want to fight more often. If you're fighting, Conor McGregor's been a pretty active guy. He doesn't have to be because he makes a boatload of money every time he steps out there. Demetrius Johnson makes okay money, but he probably wants to be more active, make more money. I was looking at this matchup though, and I realized that there weren't a lot of really good options there. I thought about Jussier Formiga, and I thought about Zach Bukowski, and then I was looking at their records, and both those guys are coming off I think one of them has lost 3 of 5, one has lost 2 of 5, but they both, what the common ground is, Benavidez has beaten them. I think one of them, Cejudo, has beaten. So there's all these guys who are right below DJ, and they're the ones who are beating all the guys below them. So the guys below them, none of them really have great winning streaks because they can't get by those gatekeepers, but those gatekeepers aren't going to be fighting DJ anytime soon. So the UFC's in a kind of a weird predicament with that.
You can only power wash your fence for so long, right? And gotta get moving on.
point.
But I will say that I will say that it caught me by surprise. But we've had so many discussions about the sort of dearth of talent that's coming up there, and how some of those guys that are just below DJ and that he's keep beating the guys that are kind of coming up. So it's hard to generate these. But you do look at it and you think, well, at least he's fresh blood. I know it sounds like a little bit like the stake slid under the door or something like that. But at least as a guy, he has not fought before. He is kind of, he's won 3 out of his last 4 fights. You think he's pretty good. I can't get out of my mind though when he was in Bellator getting knocked out by Eduardo. And who was the other one? Patricio Pitbull. Yeah. It's like I remember those fights more for some reason because I think they were sort of highlighted at the moment. But so I don't see a big path of victory for him, but at least he's somebody who is a little bit on his hot streak. And I guess if you're going to pick somebody in that top 10 space, I mean, he's as good as anybody else at this point.
I like the fight, actually. Number 1, Demetrius Johnson's never been hotter. Ride it. Let's go. Push it. See how far you can take it. If you're ready to go, the burner's never been hotter, man. So let's see what we can cook with it, right? That's the first part. Second part is a lot of these guys who are getting title shots, it was like, oh, he got it against Horiguchi too early. Oh, Moraga got it too early. Wilson Hayes has been around the game a very long time. If he was not going to get a title shot in any weight class in the UFC, now he was never going to get it. He also was a long-time bantamweight, flyweight, sort of a new endeavor for him, relatively speaking. He's 33, I think, wasn't he? Something like that. Long story, but be that as it may, I think it's good for Wilson Hayes. I think it's a good challenge. Look, Wilson Hayes in pure BJJ, this is not what that is significantly better than Demetrius Johnson on the ground. We'll see in MMA if that's true. We'll see if he can even get it there. However, there are at least some moderate interests in terms of the skill levels here and what the challenge poses. But for me, if I'm Demetrius Johnson, man, ride that wave, push it, see where it goes.
I also love, too, it's a co-main event, right? That's what it was announced as. And again, I thought he really thrived in that role. He sort of stole that show, and I feel like it's a perfect sort of setup for UFC 201.
There's no pressure on him to sell tickets and co-main event.
I agree with both of you. I like it because, as you said, I really feel like something changed. He benefited from being on the co-main event slot under John Jones. I think after that fight, everyone was sort of comparing him to John, being like, look, he had the more exciting fight. Something has changed. He feels more comfortable. I think the fans are a lot more into him as a fighter. And there's an appeal, in my opinion, to dominant champions. There's something about a guy who just continues to kick ass in his division. You compare that to the heavyweight division, where it almost seems like at times the belt gets devalued because it's being passed around and also never being defended. It's almost defended once a year. So here you have this guy who's just obsessed with the idea of becoming the most dominant champion of all time. And if this is somewhat of a showcase title fight, that's cool with me as a co-main event on a pay-per-view. Like, Demetrius Johnson is worth the price of admission at this point. Like, we are seeing something special.
Yeah, he's got flair for dramatics. That Horiguchi fight at the very end, just what he just did to Suda. I mean, he's showing, and somehow it's translating now that he's exciting. I mean, it's not just the technical brilliance that some people are, you don't see that, you're not a fan. It's like he's finishing these guys in dynamic ways at this point.
Yeah, and I think you nailed it also with Wilson. Maybe he's on a 6-fight winning streak. But this is a veteran. Also comes from a great camp, Alliance MMA. Eric Del Fiero will have him ready. Can he hang with DJ in an MMA fight? You don't know. But he's not some schmuck that they're picking up who's 24 years old and you think that he'll get another chance. Like, this guy's been around.
Wilson Hayes' grappling videos, man. He is a monster on the mat.
I was really hoping to see the tough one again, but whatever, maybe.
Right. I like this much better than that.
Knock on wood.
There are money fights out there for DJ, to some degree at least, but it just seems like they're not in that weight class.
Yeah.
But he's so obsessed with getting that record, and I'm okay with that. I like the idea that he wants to, that it's not just about the money for him, it's also about his legacy, and he wants to be able to go past that Anderson Silva record. And so this is a chance to get one closer, then he'll be able to tie the record if he gets by this one, and he'll probably want to do that pretty quickly as well. And then he's got all these opportunities. He can move up and try to fight whoever's still the champion at 135. He can fight some of the guys who are refugees from his division that are now 135. We were talking on the way in here, it wouldn't have been fun to see John Lineker, but they'd never have John Lineker fight him at flyweight, because what if Lineker beat him, then he's never going to make weight again.
Although that would be a hell of a fight.
It'd be a great fight, but if those fights can take place at the, if he can get guys who are not the bigger but the smaller 135 guys who are really good.
I think too, I think people believe him on his historical, what he's trying to do. We used to hear Benson Henderson. I remember Benson Henderson was one of the guys who was like, I'm chasing these records, I'm going to fight everybody, I'm going to break these records. It was hard to believe because, as we were talking, I think last week or 2 weeks ago, just how profoundly deep that division is, the 155-pound division. Well, on his, when you talk about Demetrius Johnson, you're thinking 125, he could do this. I feel like we believe him that he could do this. He should do this almost, because you don't see guys coming up to replace him at this point. So I feel like we're starting to actually believe him in his historical, what he's chasing at this point.
When he first came up, everyone's like, well, let's examine DJ. And maybe people liked it, maybe they didn't. But now DJ is not being examined. His cause is being examined. And all MMA fans can get behind his cause, where he just goes and power washes your stupid face. Right? I mean, that's what he's doing now. Let's see how many. And he's going one by one, breaking it. I think no matter if you like him or hate him, everyone wants to be party to that experience.
Nobody hates him. Nobody hates that guy.
Yeah, there you go. Nobody hates him. But well, Wilson Hayes might hate him. Come in
also,
July.
You mentioned fresh blood. I do like this idea better than the idea of like a Benavidez getting a third crack at him when he lost twice. To me, there's not much appeal there. I like the idea.
At some point, I actually sort of feel like if we get, I mean, I know we're going a little bit ahead of ourselves, but if DJ can win the next two and he's going to set that record for himself, I sort of feel like if Benavidez is still there, he's the second best guy in that division. I would like to see him.
How many cracks do you get? And then how many? And if you win the third fight, how many cracks does DJ get in him?
Decision. The first one was a split decision. Right. You know, I would be okay with it. Moving forward, if Benavidez goes out, isn't Benavidez' next fight against Cejudo? If he could do to Cejudo what DJ did or something like that, I'm okay with it.
They officially announced that it is going to be Tyron Woodley versus Robbie Lawler. What a journey this has been for Woodley. By the time he fights, I think he'll have been out for 18 months or so. And after the Maia win on Saturday night, people were then saying, well, give it to Maia. Every time another welterweight has fought, he becomes the flavor of the week. I think the UFC got it right only because, as we mentioned last week, they're keeping this train moving along. Are you, now that it's official, are you okay with it? Or do you think they should have done Maia, who didn't get all that beat up in that fight, or waited for Rory and Wonderboy, Neil Magny, etc.?
I wouldn't have minded if they had given it to Maia. I don't know that he's the most deserving. Well, he's a pretty deserving candidate, at least relative to Tyron Woodley. But to me, it's not very difficult to figure out, right? Like, they have a calendar they have to fill out that includes both fight nights and then includes pay-per-views. So you said you could have given it right to Thompson, but then McDonald's going to fight. So who could you give him? Maia's already had a fight lined up. They have to book this one for McDonald's. So you could have given him Woodley again. That makes no sense. He already beat Woodley, and by the way, that fight was terrible. There has to be some cachet both to the fight night card and to the pay-per-view card. Now you could say, well, what does Woodley bring for Robbie Lawler? Well, at least it's for a title fight. There is some kind of thing there. So to me, when you play it out on those strengths, the decision makes a lot of sense. I also think we'll see what happens with Maia. I don't think they're going to deny him a title shot, but I can see how they might be a little bit like, let's see him get past Woodley. Let's see what happens with Thompson, because if Maia wins, that creates some challenges for the UFC.
In terms of what? He's not the most exciting fighter?
Promoting him. It'd just be really difficult. We have this guy who just gets on your back and sits there, until you can get him off like a koala bear. And
but you appreciate what he does.
Oh my God, he is. I mean, it's just a virtuoso performance every time. But I can see other donks, throwing beers in the cage.
It's not what Luke appreciates or we appreciate.
Sure.
You follow jiu-jitsu a lot closer than the rest of us, but I think we all can appreciate what Demian Maia does. But it is about, as you said, it's really about that bigger population. But in some ways, I think that there's still something intriguing about that. You get a guy who's jiu-jitsu heavy, and when people who are casuals see a Demian Maia fight, they may not have any appreciation for what he's doing and why that leg is in that position or whatever. But when you see him seeming to go against these monsters, even the fight against Matt Brown, where there was Matt Brown had almost no bright moments in it. But I've seen other fights where Maia just looks like it's almost magical. He's doing things that those of us who don't train jiu-jitsu are like, what is he doing?
And it goes beyond that. He's not taking any damage. Somebody put out a stat of how many significant
12 strikes and 3 fights combined.
And 3 fights. Yeah. And it was like some very low number. I mean, it was like ridiculous. And when you can get through those 3 guys, it was like Magny, Gunnar Nell, it was like those guys, and you're thinking, he goes through those guys without even getting hit. There's something so sublime about that you can't help, regardless if you see the aesthetic in it or not, you can't help but appreciate that, right?
So are you guys saying that you would have preferred Maia over Woodley?
I was always behind Woodley, but let's face it, his last fight was a split decision victory, and he's been idle for a year and a half. What happens in the fight game? It keeps moving, and I feel like we've been back and forth with what should happen to him. In my mind, I would have liked to have seen, and I know they didn't want to wait this out, but I think Wonderboy, if he's able to beat McGregor, he's the clearer guy. But like you, I'm sorry, exactly.
McGregor, right?
So I keep all these mixed.
Well, he could still get it. He could just wait.
He can still get it. So he could get it. That's what I'm saying. They're close enough together. You can
Right.
still put that together because the calendar does come into play. Ultimately, I'm okay with it because I thought Woodley, he's champion. You know, he's been talking about it for so long. It's been dangled in front of him. I feel like it's his time. They finally get the thing rolling with him.
Yeah, it was dangled in front of him, and I guess he was promised something. Not that that means anything.
But I think that's important to note. I really do.
I agree.
I mean, how many times have guys been promised and it hasn't come
Tate.
to fruition?
Right.
Yeah,
Misha
and,
Tate.
and they actually stuck to this one
Yeah,
when
but
they could have
also-
easily not, right?
And also was they weren't just riding the hot the hot bat like in a baseball game. They were, when Wonder Boy went out there and did what he did to Johnny Hendricks. He was ranked like maybe 8 or 9 or something, and all of a sudden he just shot up the rankings for everybody. Now I'm not talking about just the UFC rankings, but all the media rankings. And I remember at the time thinking, this guy, that is a kind of performance that earns you an instant title shot. And I was ready to have him jump over everybody, but they didn't go that way. And so if they're not going to give it to that guy, I don't think that Demian Maia necessarily. I know he was higher ranked than Wonder Boy was when he started out. And he certainly dominated Matt Brown, but I don't think that he had the kind of performance that also would make him leapfrog. So I'm totally fine with Woodley getting this one, despite his inactivity. His inactivity was not a result of him not taking fights. It was a result of him waiting for the title shot.
No, and I'm happy that Lawler's getting back in there. It's good to keep it moving because we have all these fighters now waiting. What happens to Maia? What happens to Magny? What happens to the winner of Wonder Boy McDonald? So it's good that he's just getting back in there.
And this is also one of those situations like we were talking about before with the middleweights. These are good problems to have. You've got. We just mentioned 3 different people all of whom, and if you add Robert McDonald back in there,
Or GSP.
Happy birthday, George St. Pierre,
birthday,
35th birthday today.
Oh, he's old.
Or that Carlos Condit guy, if he ever comes back.
right.
I mean,
Nick Diaz coming back as well.
There are good problems, and the welterweight division right now has a good problem, which is with a lot of guys, all of whom are pretty competitive.
The UFC is inconsistent with keeping their promises, but when they do, we shouldn't be mad at it.
No, I think it's-
like you just never know when they're just like, all right, man, we owe you. We just don't want to do you wrong, and they may go back and do me right, then do you wrong. But if they do this one person right, I'm not going to cry about it too much.
Sure. Okay, so a nice little card brewing in Atlanta. Yesterday, UFC Tonight reported that they were targeting, I'm not sure the word that was used, but that they wanted to book Jermaine Darandami versus Chris Cyborg at 140 pounds. Moments later, Chris Cyborg goes on Twitter and says, that's not true. I am defending my title next to Invicta. Now, it's interesting because she is a Zuffa fighter, yet Zuffa pays her when she goes to Invicta. How this mistake happened, I don't know, but her team is maintaining that she is not fighting Jermaine Darandami as of right now at 140 pounds. She wants to fight at 145 pounds. Now, I want to ask you guys about this because, I thought one of the big revelations coming out of 198 and really going into 198 was how big of a star Chris Cyborg was. I mean, Saturday afternoon, I'm just flipping through the New York Post, and there's a full-page spread on just her. Like, you would have thought, if you're some casual sports fan, that she was the main event. You saw the reaction that she got. I think online, mainstream sports, people were aware that Chris Cyborg was fighting. I had some sports guys write to me about her at 139 and how much is she going to weigh come fight night. People were very interested in her. People care about Chris Cyborg. She's a star, and she's only now fought once in the UFC. So there's something there, and I think it's great that the UFC wants to capitalize on that, put her on pay-per-view on a card that could use a little bit of a bump. It's good after 200 to put her on there. So I get the idea, but she's now saying she wants to go back to Invicta. And again, like, she fought in front of more people on Saturday night than all 5 of her Invicta fights combined. So why do you think Chris Cyborg does not want to jump on this gravy train along with the UFC? Is it that weight class issue? Does she really care that much about the title? Like, where do you think her head is at coming off what I thought was a star-making performance?
Yeah, it was a star-making performance. Just want to say I'm going to repeat this until it is conventional wisdom. It has been a giant mistake to keep her out of the UFC.
Yes.
She should have been in there a long time ago. And everyone being like, Rousey's the star, Cyborg's not. Yes, Rousey's a bigger star. Cyborg is also a star. Okay, we took calls on 198, by the way, my radio show. First segment was a Stipe, I got 2 calls. We pulled Cyborg, I got 50 calls.
Yeah,
okay, but to your point, here's what I think it is. If you talk to her nutritionist, getting her to get to
George Lockhart.
to 139, he said she had to do 3 a days, 6 days a week, that it was torture to get her down there. And I think she's saying to herself, I don't mind going down there, but boy, it better be worth my time. Jermaine Durandamy is a big name, but she can take her down and just wipe the floor with her. I don't think that's necessarily in her interest, and I think making 145 is more doable. She gets paid the same no matter what, right? Because it's the Zuffa contract are relatively similar anyway. So for her, I also think it's probably a negotiating thing, right? I don't want to take this fight right away. You're going to pay me more. We're going to do it on my terms. These are things we're going to work out slowly because now, I'm not saying she has a ton of leveraging power,
Sure.
but she has a lot more than she used to.
Yeah. You mentioned Rousey, Cyborg Rousey, the two big stars in women's MMA. Would they have offered Ronda Rousey this fight? No, not at all. They're going to, Ronda Rousey's star power, they bring in somebody who's also can meet her with star power. I think Cyborg wants to fight against one of the top people in the
But she's saying
women's.
she wants to defend her
Well,
145
she's saying
title.
that, but I think
okay,
that,
you don't believe her.
Well, I believe that she'll do that, but I believe that the thing that's going to draw her away from that and into a
big
UFC fight is a big fight. This is not a big fight, and I know good striking, all that, but this is not a big fight. You know, she's not in there with Holly Holm. She's not in there with Ronda Rousey. She's not in there even Kat Zingano even. Come on, give her
The
somebody.
biggest buzzkill ever, really, when she got up there and was like, I'm going to go defend my victim. Because it was like, who are you challenging at that point? You're
Right.
challenging Anonymous. There's nobody really out there. It's like, you're in the fight game, it's like, what's next? And when you see something like that, you want her to call out Ronda Rousey.
Totally.
Because when the mainstream media latched on to Ronda Rousey, it was at the exclusion of any footsteps outside of that. They didn't know who was out there. Just as it's Ronda Rousey and nobody else.
Yeah.
We all knew that there was Cyborg that was out there. We knew that she was there, and it was a matter of always like, somehow we have to find a way for them to meet. And here was that moment for her to go up there and say, hey, you know what, whatever it is, but just to roll out Ronda Rousey's name, because that was her moment to say, like, you guys have been wrong. You guys didn't know who the best woman out there was right now. And I know there's the weight thing, so maybe that is the biggest issue, but I would have loved to hear her mention Ronda Rousey in that thing. It's just, it was such a buzzkill for me to hear her say she was going back to do that. And even right now, it's two different kinds of thuds, right? Like you're talking about her fighting, what's the woman's name?
Jermaine.
Yeah. And in that fight, it just doesn't. It's Leslie Smith again. It's like we saw the Leslie Smith thing. Well, I'm saying like she's going to be installed as a massive favorite in the fight for the very reason, like you said, take it to the ground and destroy her there. I mean, you want to see her against the elite names, I guess, at this point.
And I don't think it's unfair. I think obviously she's a better striker than Leslie Smith, but I think Leslie Smith is
by orders of magnitude.
right. And Leslie Smith is okay here and okay there. This is somebody who is so one-dimensional that Cyborg could just have her way with her. I mean, unless Cyborg comes in there and decides, unless she pulls a Ronda Rousey, and like Rousey came in and believed in her head, I can strike with Holly Holm. I'm going to go in there, and even though I could take Holly Holm down to the mat and do what Miesha Tate did, I could do that. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go in here and strike with this woman because my boxing's as good as hers. And then, of course, we saw what happened there. Unless Cyborg has that same mentality, this fight will be no more competitive than the Leslie Smith fight.
I said earlier this week that I feel like in 2016, titles in MMA have never meant less. Because of what Bellator is doing, and we'll get to that in a second, because of some of the matchups the UFC has made, titles just don't mean as much. And this is not some revolutionary idea. People have been talking about this for quite some time. So I respect the fact that Cyborg shows up to Media Day with her Invicta title. She is trying to make that thing into an important item. She talks about it all the time. She says she wants to defend it. She is proud, for whatever reason, of being an Invicta champion. So I definitely respect that.
Such a lonely hill, though, when there's no
Absolutely.
challenges.
And that's why it doesn't make any sense.
Don't you disrespect Charmaine Tweed.
It doesn't make any sense. But here's the thing that I can't wrap my head around. Why are they obsessed with this idea of forcing her to go down to 140 when that weight class doesn't exist? There's no difference in the UFC of fighting at 145 or fighting at 140. The weight class, it doesn't exist in, there's no 145-pound title, there's no 140-pound title. So are we trying to punish her? Are we trying to say like, oh, we
level the playing field.
Well, the fighters are there. The fighters are there. There aren't any 145-pound
Did you
fighters.
see what she looked like when she weighed in at 140? Like it feels like it's almost cruel to make her do this. If you can find a Jermaine Darandami who has fought at 145, an Amanda Nunes who has fought at 145, a Miesha Tate who has fought at 145, Holly Holm who has fought above one. If you can find people to take these fights, then take them. She is a big enough star to command.
How big of an if is that, though?
But to me, my point is that she's a big enough star to command this special treatment. We've talked about this on this show.
Yes, I
special
agree.
fighters get special treatment.
Sure.
And this idea that like, oh, she popped for steroids, so we must punish her continuously and force her to be dehydrated and look
She's
like
the only
hell.
person who's ever popped for steroids. in
looks
MMA.
like-
She's the only one that's ever.
No,
popped.
but there's like this narrative came out with Ronda saying that like, oh, she must meet me down at 135.
Yeah.
Well, Leslie obviously had no problem. Holly Holm has no problem meeting her. Misha has no problem meeting her. Just make her. If she can't make it.
And the double standard about, oh, we care so much about weight cutting, we're going to get rid of IVs, but Cyborg, you better,
Yes.
you better lose every ounce of water weight imaginable.
This new rule that you have to come in, with only 8%
Right.
left. I mean, it's
Rule.
at this point, it's to me, it feels so. Why don't we just let her? If you don't want to institute a title there and just make fun fights, just make fun fights.
Why
you
not-
stand to gain.
But why not bring, also, it's been suggested, why not just bring 145 out of Invicta over to UFC? It is extraordinarily weak, but they can cut it whenever they want. Fans are not going to cry if when Cyborg retires, they get rid of 145, unless there's another crop of stars there.
And remember what people said about 135. There's no one for Ronda to fight after she
Right.
beat Alexis Davis and all these people. So and look what's happened, right? So I agree with that. Why not just make her a champion? Chris Cyborg is a bigger draw than a lot of the champions in the UFC already.
she is.
We learned this last week. So I don't understand the fascination with, or they're just so fixated on having her fight at 140. And also they need to figure out a way of making her say like, yeah, the Invicta thing was good, but you need to come here. Like you need to fight on these cards
They're
for
paying
us.
her, like I said, they're paying her
Yeah.
the same.
It's
to
such
fight
a-
on Fight Pass,
It's strange, and they stand to gain from that as well.
Sure.
Because Fight Pass is a great, money maker for them. But I just think give her big fights. Look, it's not for the belt. You can't make the weight. You can't make the weight. But that doesn't mean we all can't stand to gain from you just fighting fun fights, right?
Right.
Strange.
Also, the other thing that might be holding them up is the amount of money they're going to pay someone. Like if you're Jermaine Duran to me,
Yeah.
and they're like, okay, we'll pay you your exact same contract, but you don't have to cut as much weight. You can go to 145. You can fight Cyborg there. She might tell you to pound sand, and I wouldn't blame her. Like who is going to show up to fight Cyborg at 10-10? Only a dumbass.
100%.
Only a dumbass.
Well, that's why she needs to fight the upper echelon.
Right, but also, like, if you want these 135-pound women to go up to a full 145, you got to pay them. And I don't know how liberal the UFC is being with their purse strings at this moment.
Also, isn't it a win-win for Misha Tate? If Misha Tate fights her in a super fight and loses, she's still the champ.
Right.
So it's kind of a great situation.
There is that as well. Although there's some tarnishing that happens. But I agree that it wouldn't be as disastrous otherwise.
Okay, let's talk quickly about the Will Brooks situation, and to a degree, the Vitaly Minakov situation. So on Saturday afternoon, just hours before Bellator 154 and UFC 198, Bellator comes out with the great PR move of announcing something of this magnitude, knowing that in a couple hours it will get pushed down, the blog roll, if you will, that they have released Will Brooks. Actually, they parted ways with Will Brooks. His contract was coming up in the summertime. Parted ways with him, stripped him of the title. They have not parted ways with Vitaly Minakov, who hasn't fought for them for like 2 years, but they have stripped them as well of the title. Okay. We knew that there was some dissension between the Brooks party and the Bellator party, but are you surprised that they did this? It's shades of the Ben Askren deal all over again. To a degree, the Jake Shields situation in Strikeforce, clearly hurting his leverage, but at the same time, I think you can make the case that they're also hurting their title.
I let them know what was going on behind the scenes in terms of how willing he was to play the game with them, because this is not just there's something else that's going on that we're not seeing, because they're the fact that they would just part way with him like this. There's something personal, I think, and I don't know, personal. Maybe personal is not the right word, because that would suggest that he has something with Coker or somebody. But yeah, I don't know. It just seems as though, like you're saying, they put him out to pasture and limited his options. Whereas instead of putting, I think it would have been more fruitful to at least pretend to show some interest, so that when his contract is up, if the UFC or somebody else is going to pay him, they're going to at least be in some kind of a bidding situation where
Well, they drive up
it
the
would drive
price.
the price up a little
Yeah.
bit. But they didn't even do that.
Well,
so
he did say this week that they offered him a deal not that long ago, and he turned it down. And once it was clear that he didn't want to fight for them, or at least test the market, that's when they said, you know what, we're out of this
every
business.
once in a while, and this happens in other sports, sometimes you'll see something that seems baffling on the surface, where some team just drops this player or that player, and you wonder, why would they do that for nothing? And sometimes there's such a thing as addition by subtraction, and maybe that's what the situation was. They had a guy who just didn't want to be there, who was kind of a sour.
malcontent?
Yeah, and they just were like, okay, we'll move on. They've got other guys who can fill that division. Maybe just
I'm not sure why they just couldn't. I don't know. It's one of those things. I just never felt like they were that together. You know what I mean? Will Brooks for a long time, I know he's sort of lamenting his Twitter usage on your show, like some of the things he was saying and whatnot, but I just never felt like him and Bellator were on the same page, and I felt like he really lived in this world of theoretical matchmaking. It was he beat Michael Chandler those couple times, and every time there was like somebody coming, like Vincent Henderson recently, we're talking about Will Brooks. When Gilbert Melendez was signing, we were talking about with Will Brooks. It was like he was that one key piece in Bellator that was sort of, you're like, well, that's going to be a fun fight if those guys, but they never fought. It was always Dave Jansen or somebody like that. You know what I mean? It was something like that, and I feel like it was odd. The whole thing has been odd, and at some point you're saying, this isn't working, so at some point you're like, maybe it needs to just move on. That's how I kind of felt about this. It never felt like it was going to work together for these guys.
Not everyone is meant to work with everyone. You talk to Will Brooks, and I think now he's happier. I mean, he's also stated that he was so unhappy that it changed him while he was there, that he just generally was negative in ways that he's not normally negative. I find it to be very true.
Yeah.
You actually see him in person, he's actually quite a happy guy. And you didn't get that sense online from him. But for me, it's like, look, you talk to some of those like Spike and Bellator officials, you bring up Will Brooks' name, and you get some strange looks back at you, and you talk to Will about Bellator, and he would be like, I don't know, they just could not find a way to find any common ground. What is the point about keeping a guy when there's just a toxic atmosphere between the parties? Yes, he's a champion, and cutting one is never a first option. It is always a regrettable choice. But I think that's much less regrettable than handcuffing a guy to a deal, or trying to handcuff a guy to a deal anyway, where he does not want to be.
But don't you think it's on Bellator as the organization to try to figure out a way of making this guy happy, in the sense that, look, I know he's not a needle mover. I know that people aren't lining up to watch him fight, at least right now, and I think part of that is because they haven't done a great job of promoting him. But let's just look at the history of the UFC. Even when the UFC was number 2, in their history, how many champions have they had? And how many champions have they had to release as champion? Just like not being able to make a deal with and say, you know what, we're just going to cut bait. Bellator has now done it twice in the span of like 2.5 years. With the Ben Askren situation, and now with this, and then they release, they
under
strip.
A different regime.
Absolutely, but it's still, this is still the Spike regime.
Yeah.
It's not the Scott Coker regime, but it's still the Spike ownership or the Viacom ownership. My point is, when you do this, look, one of the things that always appealed to me as an MMA fan before I was a journalist was the title means something. That thing means something. Look at the way Stipe Miocic is treating that title. He feels like this guy is on cloud 9. Yeah, it's just like it's a beautiful thing to watch. And they're just saying like, okay, we're just going to get rid of you and put Pitbull and Chandler in there, and it's all going to be well and good. But to me, I can't get over the fact that Ben Askren annihilated Koreshkov. Until Ben Askren comes back and defends that title again, it's always going to feel a little weird to me. I don't know, maybe I'm just a stickler for these sort of things. So I feel like you're hurting yourself. Yes, he may be a malcontent. Yes, he may be a pain in the ass. Figure out a way to put him in there in a fight.
You're treating it like it's a nuclear option. I think it's just a bad option.
In terms of what?
You're right. There is a sporting cost to it. You're right. It does hurt the brand. You're right. They have to hit reset on this division almost. Are those still reasons to keep Brooks? I think Scott Coker would tell you no. Even they're willing to eat those costs associated with it to move on to more productive ends.
You're also giving him a one-finger salute on the way out because he has zero leverage.
It's a cruel business, man.
Zero leverage.
It's a cruel business.
Unbelievable.
It's interesting that it's 2 different regimes, though. That you mentioned the Askren one and now this one. That
what's
these
the
are
common denominator?
2 different leaderships. Well, yeah, but that's telling. It's not just because everybody talked about Bjorn Rebney and he was, as soon as he got out of Bellator, okay, now the glory days are going to come in, and basically, in some ways, it's business
Although
as
the
usual.
same sort of thing happened with Scott Coker and Jake Shields. Never did it to Alistair Overeem when he was the heavyweight champion and didn't defend his title for like 2 years or so. He just sort of reappeared after a stint in Japan. I don't know. I just wish that they could have figured out a way to keep him happy and to keep him on board and have him fight Michael Chandler. And I want to ask you guys before we move on to the last topic: should the UFC sign Will Brooks? Is this a guy? Do you think he has any or does he just take that? Because to me he's going back and forth with Kevin Lee on Twitter, and I'm thinking why are you doing that, man? You're the Bellator lightweight champion. You need to shoot.
You should be gunning like what
Eddie Alvarez. You should you have a history with Eddie Alvarez, right?
It's always the thing when Eddie Alvarez or Gilbert Melendez were in different organizations. I always talk about the partition. You couldn't see these matchups. Well, he's one of those guys. He beat Michael Chandler at the time when Michael Chandler was having this whole thing with Eddie Alvarez. He was the monkey wrench, and he's looked great ever since. He's carved that out for himself. I feel like he's you could look at that roster, 155 in the UFC, and put him against any of those top 10 guys, and you've got a great fight. You know what I mean? Like,
I fear
love
though
that sort
that
of
the
thing.
UFC is going to be like, look, we don't want to sign you because they just release you, so you're their scraps. And also, if we do sign you and you go on a roll and become our champion, it just makes Bellator look better. Look, the Bellator champ is now the UFC champ. You know what I'm saying? That's the same kind of predicament that happened with Ben Askren. It was a much more confusing deal there because he was crapping on the UFC and made a lot of enemies there. But you get what I'm saying? Like, I could see them taking a pass and having a World Series of Fighting sign
That would be truly tragic.
I can't see that. You really think so? I don't know. I mean,
I could see it happening that way, yeah.
Or one FC, so Askren has someone to fight.
well,
Although different divisions.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
170,
That's right. He moved up. Yeah, that's right.
Okay, let's give a nod to the heavyweight champion here. What a great moment that was, right? He wins. They get the great audio of him shouting, "I'm the champion, I'm the champion." I mean, it was a beautiful moment, and we've sort of been all talking about it in our own ways about what happened with Verdum, and we don't need to get into that. But I want to ask you guys if last week on the show you said Stipe Miocic, not the best interview, not the most marketable guy.
He's not.
But do they have something in this sort of part-time firefighter, blue collar, king of Cleveland? They're talking now about having is there something there? Because I feel like
Cleveland part definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely. The part-time firefighter thing, it sounds good, but then you're like, your UFC heavyweight champion does this part-time? Okay. That's
man of the
weird.
people.
Yes,
Yeah,
the
they're
man
not
of the people
fine.
part, I like. Like, for example, I moved around as a kid all the time, man. Every other year I was just in a new town. And when I finally became an adult, I settled in D.C. I grew up in a little bit in D.C. as well, but I came back as an adult and I said, I'm going to make this my home. What is it like to be the unofficial mayor of your town?
Yeah.
That is such a cool thing that almost no one gets to experience. And Stipe Miocic is out there hitting home runs with the Cleveland Indians, and he's courtside with his belt with a Della Vadova jersey at the Quicken Loans Arena. This is incredible, and they're going to bring an event there. I really feel like the town has embraced him, and he has this long-standing history with town. That, I do believe, can absolutely work. But now how great can that be expanded at scale?
Sure.
We're going to find out.
They- Go ahead.
I thought you were going to ask.
No, I was just going to say, it feels like they definitely have something there as far as that angle is concerned. I mean, I can't recall the last time a local community and all their sports teams, and it wasn't just after the fact. Like, someone was tweeting me about how the Warriors, had Luke Rockhold at their event with the belt. But the Indians and the Browns and the Cavaliers were tweeting about him all Saturday leading up to the fight, saying, good luck, and the players.
Have you been to
I've never
Cleveland?
been. I've never been.
I've been there for some sporting events.
It's an amazing town.
It's
Yeah,
glorious.
Like real,
But there's a
real sports fan.
But there is a legit depressing, defeatist
Yeah.
attitude out there. It's like you're there and you go to a game and there's you can feel the defeatist attitude in what's going on. It just hangs in the air.
But
So imagine.
it's a unifying.
Exactly, and they are unified in that. I imagine though somebody finally comes through and breaks through at a heavyweight, and he's able to break through the way he did, going into Curitiba and pulling that out like that against Verdum. I mean, imagine what that must be like for those people. Now, I don't know if they look at it like the drought is over, 52 years is behind us, because they still have the sport teams that their grandfathers had to suffer through. You know what I'm saying? But at the same time, it probably feels like, hey, maybe we've got like there's a ray of hope for something.
Imagine if he's
in
the
our
one
sporting
that
events,
kinda...
and I feel like the teams are really behind him, and it is really cool. And I do feel like they've got something on that level.
And it's he's an authentic Clevelander.
Yeah.
And a sports fan and an athlete. I mean, the fact that tell me how many UFC fighters, what is there, 400 something guys on the roster? I want to see all those guys step up to the plate during batting practice. How many of those guys are going to go yard?
Twice. He did it twice.
Yeah,
Crazy.
There aren't many guys who are going to go yard. Those guys do not. He is a legitimate athlete in multi-sports, and the fact that he shows up at the Cavs playoff game not wearing a LeBron jersey.
Yeah.
He's
Della Vadova.
Yeah,
right.
he's great.
That's like, you got to be a real fan of your hometown
He's like
team.
that. He's subtly good
Yes,
with
yes.
that sort of thing, but he's just not very good.
Because he doesn't have to try.
It's true.
It's just who he is.
true,
Right?
yeah.
He's just
Yeah.
authentically Cleveland in that way.
It's very refreshing, and I love the fact that they're considering finally going to Cleveland. I mean, Cleveland fans have been asking for an event for a long time, but this is, and plus they have some other great, there's Jessica Ai, there's some good Ohio fighters. You can load up that card, but this is what you have to do. You get a champion who's a huge deal in his market, and you bring him to that market. You don't bring him to
Right.
Las Vegas.
Think about
and
it,
force
boxing does this all the time. Like
Yes.
we talked about, like TJ Dillashaw and Dominic Cruz, they fought in Boston.
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
Why? They have no Boston connection. Now it worked out, it wound up being great. I'm not saying it was a bad thing, but it's nice to have guys. I live in D.C. The biggest fighters in our area are boxers. Lamont Peterson versus Amir Khan. This was like one of the hallmarks of my D.C. life.
Yeah.
If you are a Cleveland MMA fan and Stipe Miocic defends his title there,
that'd be fun.
What? That must be
deal.
a thrill. That must be a true thrill.
I think they have something here. Look, he's not. It reminds me. It's like the closest thing as American sports fans. You guys can speak to this. Like when John Jones wins the belt, they're not celebrating in all of New York State. It's just different because you guys, to a degree, are spoiled. You have so many great athletes doing great things on the global stage. When you guys go to the Olympics, you kick ass. That's why I think the Conor McGregor phenomenon was so special, because when Ireland comes to play on the global stage, they never do anything of note. I mean, even in the, let's be honest.
Take that, Sean Sheehan.
In the World Cup, and all, look, but I'm just being honest, when they go to the Olympics, they get what, 1 medal, 2 medal? Here you have a guy, a fighting Irish, going in and becoming the UFC champion. It's mind-blowing to them. But Cleveland, so deprived of any kind of champion, has rallied around this guy. It's almost like a microcosm of what happened there.
City the whole way.
Beautiful.
Like he's been a part of Cleveland. Like I'm from Denver. There's a lot of fighters in Denver, but I can guarantee you nobody is really
Carpetbaggers. Right?
Yeah, I mean, nobody is like, oh my god, that guy represents Denver.
Yeah, you gotta be right. You gotta do it right though, because they have a card in Cleveland. They bring like Matt Brown in. You can't sell him as a local guy.
That's right. You can't
that's
do
from,
Ohio.
Like that's the hated other city in Ohio. So you don't want to do that.
Fair enough. Kudos to
Where's
you.
he from?
Cincinnati.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
But I just want to say kudos to you, Stipe Miocic, for living the dream.
And his post-fight interview backstage. Come on, Cavs. I know you could do it. We're gonna get this.
He's like
one.
already thinking about
This guy
game one.
is. They should. Who is the Cavaliers mascot? Get rid of that guy. Hire
That's
Steve.
right.
His reaction in the immediate aftermath of that knockout was one of the most stirring reactions I've ever. When he leaped over that cage and was embraced by his team and was like, "I'm a world champ! I'm a world champ!" It was almost. It was. I got chills, and I mean, I don't get chills
And how
watching
quiet that
that.
building was.
Yeah.
It was just. It was. Yeah, you could hear every single. You could hear a pin drop, and then he said that over and over again. It was authentic. It was authentic. You cannot make that stuff up.
I also feel like a final point for me that all of us can relate to what he's doing. He had a dream, he got it, and now he's being paraded around by his favorite teams and hanging out with his.
Can you imagine that?
Like,
you come back to New York and the Knicks are like,
I know.
"Hurry up,
I'm so jealous of the guy, but it's great. I feel like I'm living vicariously through him. Like we can all sort of relate to that, being worshipped by these $1 million.
I cannot relate to that.
Well, I mean, relate to
People
that
don't even
dream.
talk to me at the grocery
That's
store or
true.
the Metro.
Well, I can't blame him.
Much less am I sitting courtside at the Verizon Center watching John Wall.
I'm waiting for my invitation from the Giants to bring me over to the stadium.
What a world.
Ain't happening.
All right, we are done. Thank you so much for watching the program once again. Back next week. Again, who knows what the heck is going to happen. Bellator has an event on Friday, but I'm sure one thing I do know, something crazy will probably happen.
We're back next week, you said that, right?
We are back next week, yes. So stay
never
tuned
know.
for that. Yes, we are back next week. We're trying to do this every week, so keep up.
Okay.
Thursdays.
Yeah, 1 p.m. Eastern. All right, we're done. Thank you so much for watching again. For Luke, Jeff, Chuck, I'm Ariel. Appreciate your time. Enjoy the weekend, and of course, enjoy the fights.